Carlos Chávez is arguably the most influential Mexican composer of the 20th century. Born in 1899 in Mexico City, with the exception of 2 years that he lived in New York, he spent his entire life in his home country. His influence and impact on music in all of the Americas, as well as throughout Europe, was deep. He was a prolific composer in all musical genres, from solo works to stage productions, and chamber compositions to symphonies. He was also an author who wrote extensively about music, ethnic music, aesthetics, jazz, and the artistic life. He contributed over 200 articles for newspapers and professional journals on a lifelong basis. The Toccata for Percussion Instruments was composed in 1942. Written for 6 players, the piece was an idea from John Cage, who asked Chávez to compose a work for his group that was touring at the time. However, the members of Cage's group were not actually trained percussionists, and they weren't able to perform the piece due to the extensive rolls in the first movement and the fast, intricate rhythms in the third. Chávez's attention to detail and knowledge about percussion can be seen in the explanatory notes that appear in the score. He not only specifies the instruments that each player will require, but also indicates the relative pitch of each of the membrane instruments, along with clarifications on how to interpret coperto and scoperto, LV, and abbreviations he used for snares on and off. The third movement of the toccata begins with a solo timpani passage that will return toward the end of the piece. This stark entrance aims to shock the listener, occurring attacca out of the much more serene second movement. After the timpani's initial statement, Chávez sets up a large-scale hemiola with triple rhythms against the cut-time meter. With the additional use of cross accents, slur markings, along with the ever-increasing rise in dynamic, the result is a building up of energy and rhythmic complexity that grows with the entrance of each successive player. To contrast the highly syncopated and machine-like intensity of the first section of this movement, Chávez changes the tempo to moderato, reduces the texture to a trio between timpani, maracas, and snare drum with snares, and limits his rhythmic materials to a very simple set that reinforces the meter. And for a very short time, 4 measures, even offers up a little melodic passage on the glockenspiel. After a fairly extensive transition, the movement revs back up to a vivace tempo with the unrelenting hammering of 16th notes played on the small Indian drum. Above the Indian drum's engine sits a conversation between the other instruments, which becomes more and more intense and rhythmically diverse. To close out the piece, Chávez returns to the opening materials of the timpani solo with an abbreviated version of the hemiola material from the first part of the movement. The movement, and thus the entire piece, concludes with a falling away of tempo, rhythmic density, timbre, and dynamic, resulting in a musical exhale that disperses the tension and kinetic energy of the toccata.